I want to introduce our guests today. We have Salimatu Amabebe, pronouns he, they. Salimatu is a Nigerian-American chef and multimedia artist based in the East Bay area. Salimatu is the founder and director of Black Feast, which if you don't know about, you probably should. It's a culinary event celebrating Black artists and writers through food. His work focuses on the intersection of food and art, drawing from family memories, Nigerian recipes, and Black culinary history. And joining Salimatu and myself today is Kirsten Kirby-Shoote, or Kirby, pronouns she, her. Kirby is a Tlingit food activist, chef, and urban farmer, originally from Portland, Oregon. In 2015, Kirby moved to Detroit in order to explore Indigenous food sovereignty and how it's integrated into urban landscapes. Kirby is dedicated to providing the community with access to traditional foods and medicines. Her agricultural project, Lelu Gardens mission, is to cultivate relationships with our plant relatives and to help heal the wounds of ancestral trauma. Kirby also hosts pop-up dinners in Detroit and is committed to the conversation of what it means to support Indigenous food sovereignty and shift our food system. So thank you, Kirby and Salimatu, for joining us. So excited to have you with us. To kick things off, I would love to invite you both into a practice we usually do to kick off all of our conversations, which is setting the table. So often in these virtual spaces, like it sort of sets the expectations for us, and often people, we're asked to show up kind of half present. So this is our call to call us to the table, fully present in our bodies, and to name what we're bringing with us today. A call for an offering of something, and just a little more context for you all. This, practice came out of a desire to be able to introduce ourselves on our own terms and set our own context. So I'd love to ask specifically for this conversation, knowing that we're talking about naming future ancestors, Salimatu and Kirby, who are the ancestors you're calling in today, or the offerings you'd like to share? Yeah, whoever wants to kick us off, whoever feels called.
I can go first, and a slight correction, my pronouns are they, them.
I'm so
but
sorry,
you just
Kirby,
did a lot of
thank you.
words, so it's all good. My ancestors, I don't know if y'all are situated by some natural light, maybe a window, something you could look outside at. But it's weird, like staring at a screen all day. Your vision kind of focuses differently. So just if you take a moment to look out the window and feel how your vision fluctuates, and you feel a presence of something beyond yourself, just taking that and being able to call on your ancestors outside, especially outside of what goes on your little boxes. And I know they're deeply important to our work now, but out there is deeply important to our work as well. And so that's who I'd like to call on right now.
Thank you, Kirby. I would like to call in my great-great-grandmother, and I like to think that she is always with me because I have her name. And I wear this nameplate necklace that has my last name on it. So Salimatu is the name of my great-great-grandmother. She's from the north of Nigeria. The rest of my family is from the southern region of Nigeria. But Salimatu is a northern name, and it means peace be with you, comes from Arabic. And my last name is Amabebe, which comes from the southern region of Nigeria, which means voice of the people. So my name together is peace be with you, voice of the people. And I like to bring that into every space, every moment, and carry it with me. And the other thing that I I like to set a little altar next to spaces, just as also a way of grounding myself in these digital spaces, because it can be really, you're talking to people from all over. And I love to have those like physical objects that also keep me very grounded. So I keep this little dish of dried bitter leaf, and this is one of my like soul plants. And this one in particular came from my dad's backyard, and he would harvest it. We would harvest it together. And bitter leaf is one of those like magic plants that is so bitter and so healing. And there's a saying, an Igbo saying, that life is like a bitter leaf. You have to chew through the sour to get to the sweet. And it's a plant that's very, very bitter. And then after you chew it, you'll like notice a very like light, sweet flavor that enters your mouth. And so this one I don't use it in food because it's like from my dad's garden. And at this point it's been around for a while. So I use it and I just like burn some of it and just like say a little prayer to my ancestors. So I did that today before this gathering. But I'm just keeping it here and I'm bringing that also into the space. So thank you.
Thank you both. I also just appreciate the tone shift that you all bring. I feel like whenever I open things, you sort of start a show, and I appreciate the presence you all are offering in rooting back in real time, real space. Well, I thank you for those offerings and sharing sort of who you're calling in and what you're rooting in. I sort of want to start from a really basic premise. We're here talking about nourishing future ancestors, but I'd love to know what that means for you. What does that bring up for you? What does it mean to you to be a future ancestor? And maybe I'll kick it to you first, Kirby.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everybody for being here. For me, being a future ancestor, or even the concept of future ancestors, is so reliant on our past ancestors and the knowledge that they've gifted to us. And all that knowledge is care, honestly, from growing our own food and to the methods on how to prepare that food and how to sit down at a table with your family, with your relatives, and give thanks to all the different components that made that meal, from the soil who gifted you, the nutrients to grow that plant, to the water that's provided life. So future ancestors and nourishing them is about coming to terms with how we're intertwined with our land. And it's a painful relationship sometimes, and there's been a lot of trauma that's gone on, mostly at the hands of colonialism in this country. Some real backward stuff, and we all have our stories about how we have trauma with the land. And so for me, it's trying to heal that trauma for future generations. And that's my work right now. I'm not there by any means, but it's going.
I love that, Kirby, and I think you've said that to me before in prep calls about the idea of the everything that you feel deep gratitude for is an expression of care from your ancestors, and to carry that forward. I think that's such a beautiful way to start. What does being a future ancestor mean for you, Salimatu?
I mean, honestly, very similar. I feel like Kirby and I are going to be saying some very similar things on this gathering. But I think, I think that for me, there is just an understanding of where I come from and who I come from. And that, you know, for me, like my future is both written and unwritten. There is like a trajectory that I will follow because of where I come, because of who I come from, and what our relationship is to care and to food and to our bodies and our responsibility to each other and to our communities. And so to me, that, yeah, that responsibility, that's kind of what I think about nourishing future ancestors, is like this responsibility that we have to the people who are coming after us, and also to utilize those gifts of the people that came before us.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you naming, utilizing those gifts, I think, right, that leads right into the second part of the piece, right? The nourishment piece, and where you situate yourself in the work of what you offered to the community, and where you place your work in the context of that. You know, both of you do work that revolves around feeding people in some form, whether it's, you know, pop-up dinners or experiences or stewarding the land. But also I know that the work that you do goes far beyond the idea of sustenance. And I was wondering, you know, also leaning into a practice of story here, if maybe you could both share a moment, a moment when you realized that the kind of nourishment, when you realized sort of what the kind of nourishment you wanted to create for others, and sort of the bounds you put around that, or didn't, right? Maybe Salimatu, do you want to share first?
Yeah, so a moment that I learned what type of nourishment I wanted to create for others. You know, I think actually there were some specific moments that I remember, which was like, for me, when I was younger, I was in the art world, and I was studying film, and then I kind of went into the food world as a way of like supporting my art practice. Like, oh, this is just something that I am doing because I have to make money and in order to like do my art. And I moved to New York when I was 19, and I was working in a gallery, and, you know, kind of in that environment being like, okay, so the first thing you do is you do like arts administration. And in that space, I was like, I hate this. Like, this is not what I want to be doing at all. Like, put me back in the kitchen. Like, so, you know, I had left a restaurant job when I was 18, and, you know, I was working with chefs, and they're like, oh, like, let us know if you want to come back and work in the kitchen. I was like, I'm never going to work in a kitchen again. You can go fuck yourselves. And I'm like, I'm going to New York. I'm going to go do art. And so, like, then being in the art world, and then just seeing that there is something, oftentimes you don't even realize what the thing is that your like soul is being called to do. And so you're figuring it out through all of these different like spaces and places and jobs and interactions and relationships. And for me, I think that kind of moving through like food world, art world, and seeing those things as really separate rather than understanding. I think eventually I came to an understanding that the things that were important to me are is care and providing service and doing something that I feel a sense of purpose in that, and I feel that it is not that it is truly like accessible to like my friends and my family and my community. And so that's kind of how Black Feast came to be, because it is this merging of food and art. It's all of the things that I care about. And it's also not something that we're not trying to make it exclusive. We're trying to make it for as many people as possible and nourishing for as many people as possible, and something that is really caring for community.
I love that. And I think that idea of finding what you care about and recognizing what cares for you, I feel like is that thread in what so many, I don't know, probably I was similarly an 18-year-old that told a lot of people that like I knew who I was and what I was doing, and it to be surprised then what becomes your root there. Yeah, Kirby, I'd love to know how you found your way to the nourishment that you're trying to cultivate.
Yeah, I think I found it in some similar ways as Salimatu. There was a component of struggle to it, struggling and using food as a way to attain a different goal. But within food and growing food, once I came out here to Detroit, I found a freedom in that. And so my journey's been mostly about letting my people know how beautiful their food is, you know, and the blood you get on your hands from like eating raw fish is sexy, like, but we've been told generation by generation that that it's savagery, that it's unclean, and that's been the thought for so long that a lot of people haven't pushed past it, and I know I hadn't when I was younger, and you know my lips were glossed from smoked salmon. You know, I wasn't thinking about how proud I was from my food ways. I was, you know, there's an element of embarrassment, and seeing my community so joyful in how our food grows and the meals that we prepare with it. That's like that's the end game for me every day, is exposing people to our plant relatives, and you can tell that our community knows that our plants and our ancestors have cared about us by that food being there at that moment, because food is always in danger of being harmed. You know, we see that currently with climate collapse. I mean, there's endless things, and I don't want to only reiterate negative impacts on our food system, because the resilience in our food is what's coming to light right now. Like, no longer is it a tragedy. Like, our food sovereignty is on the rise, and yeah, it's just a time to rejoice.
I'd love to actually pull on that thread a little bit more with you, Kirby, because when we were talking, I was struck by how you know, very clearly spoke to your work stewarding land as an act of putting Indigenous futurism into practice. And I'd love to know, yeah, if you could share a little bit more about what you meant by that. You know, what are the stories, the stories of the future, the futurist practices that you're seeding and bedding down in the soil in your work?
Well, a lot of these stories and a lot of the knowledge has been handed down to me, and that's where all the credit goes at the end of the day. It's like not me at all, and I feel you know, there's definitely an element of imposter syndrome, and I want like everybody to know that like this work ain't just me. Like, I'm such a small fraction of all of the work that goes into creating a food system for our people and creating sovereignty for our people. You know, there are elders doing more work than my 29-year-old ass. They're, you know, even the land is so much more of a player in the scheme of things than I am. And I think that also needs to be recognized when we're having a broader conversation about food. That we're instrumental in changing, especially changing the narrative, but a lot of the credit goes to other relatives that aren't human relatives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's, well, actually, I don't want to say what I think. I'd love to hear what you think, Salimatu. What does that bring up for you, and maybe how does that relate to, you know, I know you've named your work as an offering to Black lineage, and just thinking about, yeah, how your work sort of interacts with time across generations, and maybe how you think of your work in relationship to a form of futurism or future storytelling.
I mean, yeah, I really agree with Kirby in that I see myself as a very small aspect of this. And I think that, you know, Black Feast was really created out of a need and at a certain time and place, you know, and it's, had I not been in Portland, Oregon at the time, like, I don't know that it would have, you know, it makes sense that it originated there, like, because it felt so necessary, you know, living in that place, you know. Now I want it to be something that will continue to grow and exist beyond me. And so that's something that I keep in mind with how we're doing things, is that it can never really be like just about like, oh, like this is like Chef Salimatu's food, or you know, it's not my project, it's just that I'm a part of it. And I think that you have to understand that about, I mean, about like any practice, but I think that, you know, like what we were talking about before of this being the result of the, you know, the gifts that our ancestors have given us, and that it will continue to live beyond us, like this work. And so I'm an aspect of that.
I think also when you know, as you were saying that, a couple of things struck me, both the idea of like, in order for us to receive it as a gift and then to perpetuate or to continue that lineage, we have to offer it as gift, right? Like that is inherently the way that it has to be given. And also I'm just struck, I think there's just in like the larger news ecosystem that we've been immersed in for, I mean, we're all about the same age, like, and like the sort of news narrative cycles and social media news narrative cycles are so immersing for us and shaping, I think, the way people perceive themselves. And there's this fear, I think, of being small, right? Because like to be small is to, there's a narrative about like, then you don't have enough power to shift things or change things. And so I'm struck by what both of you are saying, but Kirby, when you were speaking about, you know, that we are sort of like little ants and offering so much more recognition to the other beings who are participating in this with us, and that like to be small actually means that we get to be immersed and that we aren't alone in that work. Like when we are big, then we are often alone, right? And there's something, I don't know, I'm curious if that, like, I'd love to like chew on that a little bit more, like what, because I think nourishing future ancestors can sound like we're talking about this big title and about like making ourselves bigger than we are in this scale way. And I'm curious, like, what is the power in being a small little future ancestor among many?
Yeah. In my experience, they're, like the biggest, most, I don't know, visible things like cast the biggest shadows, right? And you see that in the media a lot as well. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, about food, problems with the food chain supply. And that issue is so big that it casts a huge shadow, and work to preserve Black food and Black food history and Indigenous food sovereignty get overshadowed with that. And this happens in every movement. I'm sure you can take a stab at a few, but so I think the work is necessary, and maybe the platform is necessary right now, but I don't think that is the goal. Maybe, just speaking for myself, and I'm sure a lot of people working with food today in these spaces have the same but varying opinion that we don't want it to always be a struggle, and it'd be great if we could not talk about it being a struggle ultimately. And yeah, so that's where that conversation often leads, is that we don't, like, the attention that I want on Indigenous food isn't what's being portrayed in the media, because it's always about like a fight, a struggle, something we have to be resilient about, and that's just exhausting at the end of the day. So yeah.
I think that point, like that so much of this work can be enjoyed in is the pleasure of it being small, quiet work. And I'm curious, Salimatu, if that sparks anything for you.
I don't know. I don't think of our events as very small or quiet. But I mean, yeah, like yes and no. Like I mean, it's hard to think of it as like so, like it's a lot, and that it takes a lot of effort, and also it's something that it's rewarding. I don't really like to use the word rewarding, actually. It also like feeds us, so it's has to be, we're really like trying to create a new model. And so with that, there is a lot of struggle in that, because we don't have so many models or examples of like how to do this, or like how to do this well. And so we're going from a lot of like a sense of intuition and sort of like ancestral knowledge, and also like, yeah, we're like trying to live under the boot of capitalism, and we're trying to like survive and thrive and care for each other, and look at new models of like supporting ourselves and each other. And so like having a model where we're making things that are free or donation based, yeah, like it's hard, because we're trying to do things that we don't necessarily have like a rubric for. So it feels like, yeah, we're not changing the world. We're just like trying to change like a very like small specific things, and we're trying to like just take care of our communities and the people, like our loved ones. And so in that sense, yeah, it's small. And then also like our events feel very like big and joyful and celebratory. And that's, I think, I don't know that I would be able to continue doing it if there weren't that aspect of it, because I would be just exhausted and mad all the time.
Totally. And I think there's something that you named there in that finding, I think, sort of ties back to like what nourished you and creating that for others, but the idea of like the radical act of trusting our gut and believing that it what I am offering is what we need, when right every force has been designed to wring that out of us with its like full force of all the systems that are like, yeah, to what you name, have their foot on our head. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, you know, we were talking in preparing for this about how we wanted this to be a space that felt nourishing in and of itself, and like that so often when we're talking about food work over time, when Indigenous and Black folks and folks of color are like platformed, that there's this kind of hunger for like digging into trauma or digging into pain that we, you know, definitely didn't want to lean into. But it's also often hard to talk about nourishment, especially within our communities and on mine as well, in terms of like Japanese-American and internment in this country and how that's wrapped up in agricultural lands as well, without naming healing and how food is entangled in grief and in the long shadow of generational trauma, but also maybe that like, you know, healing, the word itself like names a certain response to something, like to heal from something. And so I'm just curious how both of you, you know, I know when we talked, this brought up some things for you, Salimatu, so I might kick it to you first, but, you know, do you think of your work as healing, or how do you relate to that or disassociate from that?
Yeah, I think that like a lot of the response, I mean, the kind of early response I got from doing Black Foods was that it was like a healing space, or kind of that it was a space where we were really like digging into like racism. And I was like, no, it's just a dinner for Black people. Like, we're just like celebrating Black artists and like having like a beautiful 4-course meal and making it like free or by donation for Black folks. Like, it's like, we're not trying to like heal racial trauma. And also, why the fuck should we be responsible for healing racial trauma? Like, we didn't do it. So I think that there's like that's the sense that I have, which is that like they're often like viewed through the lens of whiteness. Like, this work feels like so necessary, rather than like Black people have been gathering and like eating and sharing food in community forever. You know, that's a part of what we do. And I mean, what has happened in kind of the food world is that somehow this work, like the work of creating food and creating beautiful food for people, like seen through this lens of whiteness, became something that elite white chefs are doing, and that this is like food that costs a lot of money and is very exclusive. And the thing is, like, we've been making artful, beautiful, thoughtful food for each other forever, and we'll continue to do that. And so you know, it's not such a radical thing, and it's not like so radically healing. It involves care. That's a huge aspect of it. And also, like, it both is and is not radical to care for each other, you know. And there are those two perspectives of it, that like it is in the sense of how we are like believe and really are often like forced to exist. And also we have been caring for each other and will always continue to care for each other. And that's how, that's how we continue to exist. And that's how marginalized folks continue to exist in places where we're constantly being told that we're not meant to, and constantly being kind of like pushing up against things that make it very, very hard to thrive. And it is so necessary for us to just like keep holding each other and holding space for each other.
Yeah, Kirby, I'd love to hear what that sparks for you in terms of your relationship with how you think of healing as part of your work.
Yeah, I just love Salimatu's like view on it, because like it's so much more chill than I'm such an angry person. And I'll be the first to admit it. But yeah, the way he phrases the joy that predates colonial contact is a blessing, and I think it's very true. And a lot of times I find it hard to focus on the joy aspect, and it definitely is there. But yeah, I think it's like part of like academia too, just constantly bringing up the reasons why you're doing work and having it have to be justified by a white logic. And there's really no need for it. And the places within food that I've found the most healing is like it's not even in traditional food, honestly. It's like, at making fry bread with my friends in a huge kitchen, like, heat up a bunch of oil and just like cook for the whole fam. And that's still very real and valid, even though there's a lot of people who would be like, aren't you supposed to be like undoing the effects of colonialism? But it's more about like how we interact with our community through food, and less about the actual food itself. It's a huge component, especially for me, but yeah, more about whatever happens during those dinners, that all of the ideas and all of the creations we have, and all of the drums that are ringing through the air. It's about that, not if you use like a ration, like a government ration to create that food, because joy is going to find a way. It always has and it always will.
Well, and I think also, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about like you naming like the sort of gift of that perspective, and also wanting to hold space for the perspective of like their of the sharp edges, like of the importance of like I think there's maybe part of why there can be some like contention or frustration around healing is because of like the assumption of what that has to look like, or like what that even means. And often like even the idea of like this softening that maybe like is expected of something that is healing. And I know, Kirby, like you've mentioned to me sort of the assumptions that people have around like gentleness of plant work, and those sorts of like stereotypes that it can reinforce for in Indigenous folks. And Like I think maybe there's kind of that energy that you bring and that you speak to, I think is also so powerful and important in that holding that sort of tension. And I'm curious, like, I know that's something that you express that you're like always sort of chewing on, and sort of how are you feeling about your like sharp edges and the sort of shaking shit up a little bit vibe?
I'm pretty at peace with it, but yeah, no, I mean, I'll defend any Black or brown person's anger towards the system. Like, I'll help somebody light something on fire. Like, I honestly, I think that like rage is expressed through a lot of means, and that it's not always bad to have aggression and be able to express that through food and through feeding people, because that, like, part of that drive and part of that anger is why I do my work, but it's also through love. But like when somebody you love gets hurt, like, or at least for me, like my first resort is anger. So it's kind of that fire, like it's the feathers that push the air towards the fire and make it, consume everything. Yeah.
I love that. And I'm also holding just like that as you both named, you both yourself as part of collective work, collective purpose, something that you are just like part of weaving into and in this moment, and something that lives beyond you. And as you were sort of speaking to that, thinking about the ways in which we sort of like step into the stream and out of, and there's such a formalizing, I feel like, that can happen around like people who are considered quote unquote like leaders in any space, that can be sometimes like isolating, or also just the sense of like you are at the forefront and we're going to talk to you about like how we follow you. And I'm interested, I just wanted to ask sort of like, where are you finding personally nourishment? Like, how are you nourishing for yourself as a future ancestor? What does that look like, in whatever that means to you? Salimatu.
I actually wanna go back and kind of just like add on to what Kirby,
Do it.
because
Yeah.
I feel like that I feel like talking about like anger in the work that we're doing is also really important, and how like anger is not like equal to violence, and how those are two separate things, and we've like learned to kind of equate anger to violence. And I mean, a big part of like what Black Feast is, I'm making culinary interpretations of artist work. And so a lot of that work is Black artist work is around anger. And so when I'm creating those dishes, it's around like, okay, what does anger taste like? What does anger feel like? Is this something that is comforting or soothing, or is it something that's like mirroring that response? And how that goes into like all of the work. And I think the other thing that I also wanted to talk about was like what you have mentioned around making fry bread, and how there is this pressure to like oftentimes like be as kind of like authentic as people, like sort of also through a white lens. And so there's, I make a lot of Nigerian food, and so there was like so much fear around like, okay, I need to be this representation of like traditional Nigerian food, but also like I'm a chef and an artist, and I'm constantly taking things from my surroundings and learning new things and wanting to express those through food. And how just even through like the the lens of colonialism, there's like this pressure on Black and Brown folks to be like the representatives of our like entire lineage, which is like, you know, we're carrying things with us, and also we're creators and we're creating new things, and like we're allowed to make new shit, and like we're allowed to do things that are fun and different, and create like new recipes that we then hand down to the future generations, and how it's like important to allow for that. And you know, there's like the respect and honoring of tradition, and then also not feeling like stuck or stagnant. Yeah, so that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I completely understand where you're going with the like culture bearers, you know, have to like light the torch and carry it. But yeah, it's very common place now to be like totally tradish with food. And I definitely understand where that line of thought comes from. And honoring the, you know, plants and foods that our ancestors have had access to and have a relationship with is a beautiful thing. But on the same hand, I think like the purity of having, of being like completely decolonized is an unfair pressure. And like how you were saying with Nigerian food, to have no creativity extended to you, like no room for your brilliance and like your artistic drive, like to have that kind of pulled back keeps us further from like innovating and creating. So yeah, it's definitely, I can see both sides, but I don't think it lies in the black and white. I think it's definitely going to be a middle area where that we come to terms with. And it's also a lot about coming to terms with just like the reality of like our country and how we can't live in a pre-colonized state right now. You know, we can work towards it. We can work towards going backwards, if that makes any sense. But that pressure on ourselves is only gonna like hold us back a little bit.
There's so many in like what you both named. I think that like the question of like what does honor look like? What are our expectations, and what are the expectations, frankly, that are shaped there based on a white colonial orientation to what honor looks like, in the same way of purity. And also, I think one piece here is that also named, you named, Kirby, the idea of sort of this idea of like not trying to, or we're not trying to like erase what got us here. It's like that is in naming that's why we exist. And so like what does it mean to work towards like, yeah, these pieces of and yoking ourselves from capitalism or decolonizing, whatever however you want to frame it, without trying to it be part of this narrative going backwards, because that's just not, you know, I mean, time works in a lot of different ways, but in the colonial construction of how time works, right? Like we are moving forward, and this is our history, and we're not erasing those stories, because there is loss in that. And I think in that also, you naming the idea of not being completely colonized and thinking about like who are the people we are working with to continue to complicate this conversation. And I think, you know, wanting to always hold space for like, this is a collective effort, this is a collective work, this is a collective question that like chewing on, and our answers probably change. You all are like not like elders on the front porch quite yet, so I have a feeling you're the things that you are going to be asking yourself and answering for others is going to sound different. And I'd love to end in sort of a space of wondering, you know, who are the co-conspirators and people you're working with to dream into this collective future you're hungry for. You know, you've both named collaborators and artists and folks, but yeah, who comes to mind? And those can be specific people, but also just like, who are you dreaming big with? Who are you, you know, working through shit with? Who do you feel accountable to? And what does that look like for you? Maybe I'll pass it to you first, Kirby.
I feel like lately I've been teaming up with a lot of just my sisters and aunties over here in Detroit. Detroit's amazing, and it's like all the great parts of Detroit are Black knowledge and Black creativity and Indigenous wisdom, and like this huge combination of like all these beautiful parts of our cultures. And I think being able to have these conversations with amazing food workers here, and just have Detroit be a place where we're setting the table for huge conversations on how the food system is going to look. Because there's just like so much, like the people over at Brother Nature, the people at like Keep Growing Detroit, not the organization, because they have like a lot of issues like with being just like in the nonprofit industrial complex, but like the workers at Keep Growing Detroit. Lola, who is Jamaican and has given me like the best experience of jollof rice I think I can ever experience, and with like homegrown like peppers, like I mean, like food just connects us in these amazing ways. And I actually met her through like cooking her a meal. My auntie Rosebud, who's back in the city, and she's like a Detroiter through and through, will not hesitate to like pull on up to somebody causing you trouble, and it's like really just really down like that. But she has such a connection with all of the plants here, and she's a Anishinaabe. So her, you know, her family's really from here. Yeah, and so just having these conversations around food and the land over here, I can always feel the land rejoicing when like people are growing their ancestral foods on it. There's the Joy Project, which just took up like all these amazing like African seed planting. It's like a purely educational farm right now, because they're not selling, they get to hold like a lot of important classes and stuff because they're not pressured by. So definitely invest in them, the Joy Project, to keep their work like free and accessible to people. Yeah.
Thanks, Kirby. Salimatu, who are the people you're dreaming with that keep you like stoked and nourished and, you know, alive in these questions?
My long-term collaborator who joined the Black Feast Project back in like 2019 is my friend and my, platonic life partner, Annika Hanstein-Izora, who is an amazing writer, poet, designer, artist, thinker. And they're based in Brooklyn, but they were here in the Bay Area for the last couple months, and just like inhabiting the same space and kind of the way that they have taught me so much about how to like embody kind of the practices that we're, the care that we're giving to other people, and how to really give that to ourselves, because I'm not so great at that. I will like definitely run myself into the ground to try and like make a nice thing for everyone else. And so just the reminder of like, we have to live that, like we have to like give that care to ourselves, that is like incredibly necessary, and be gentle with ourselves and be gentle with each other, and kind of live this practice in all aspects. So that's one of my co-conspirators. And Jasmine Beach is an amazing human based in Portland, Oregon, who's also been involved in Black Feast. And, we have four main members, 2 Pisces and 2 Virgos. So, really holding it down. The Virgos are getting it organized, and the Pisces are giving us the vibes, because if not, it would be no fun at all. So yeah, and the 4th person, Ariel Miles Hernandez, Pisces, and just all around just amazing contributor and thinker and artist, human in the world. So those are kind of the main folks that I'm co-conspirating, co-conspiring with. Where are we going? And then some folks in Portland, Oregon, my Black community there, Intisar Abioto, Akela Jaffe, and then, being in the Bay Area for 2 years now, and, finally kind of, being in a pandemic, feeling quite isolated, and finally being able to connect a bit more. Very hard to move during a pandemic. I don't recommend it to people. But yeah, starting to kind of like feel a bit more rooted here. And there's so many incredible, Black artists and just amazing humans here. So those are all the folks.
Yeah, I think that we do this together, and these are part of also the hope of or the space that has emerged out of for Food Culture Collective is so about that, of these moments of like convergence and not about boundaries or walls there. And so so excited to have shared this time with both of you. So many important nuggets here, and also the idea, I think, Salimatu, you leaving us in the perfect place of like, we have to embody these practices, these things we're talking about, and that is difficult for all of us. I'd love to invite folks tuning in to show a little love and offer some flowers to Salimatu and Kirby, show a little care, give it a little back. You've been on the receiving end, and maybe share something that resonated with you and offering you're grateful for, or a new question that was sparked. If you want to write something in, and then we'll waterfall it together. So just like be typing in your chat, and then we'll have the beautiful experience of everyone clicking send and getting a nice waterfall. And while people are typing that in, Kirby and Salimatu, I'd love for you to chew on maybe what's one question or thought that you'd love to either like lead with folks here or seed or ask back. You know, we don't have a Q&A here, and be turned on its head and leave us with a question that you want us to answer. So if people have their responses ready yet, maybe we'll do it on 3. 1, 2, 3. Get a little love. Wonderful. Thank you. So much gratitude for wisdom, excitement for co-creation. Thank you for power of this talk, co-conspiring with People's Kitchen Collective and Asians for Black Lives. Shout out. So much love, so much community here. Yeah, I'll swing it back to you all. What is one thought or one question you'd love to leave this community with? Whoever wants to hit us first.
I guess I would say I always like to think of like honoring people in the past, like in kind of a tangible way, I guess, or like a more thought through way. But I like to ask, like, what would you be serving up to your great grandmother? I don't, a lot of people don't get the chance to meet their great grandmother, but that matriarchal line is really important to me. I like the thought of being able to serve like an ancestor, like actually serve an ancestor. So yeah, and everybody has their own food story, so I'd be interested in hearing that.
Thanks, Kirby.
Thank you. I also really love that prompt. I love that question, Kirby. I think that I would like to leave folks with something that I've just like a practice that I've been doing, which I think is maybe a little bit cheesy, but I actually really enjoy the cheesiness of it, which is, for those of us who do not always have like maybe like our folks, like our parents, or we don't have a relationship with them, maybe they're no longer living, but just like offering, or maybe they are living and you have a great relationship with them, but maybe there are some ways in which you want to like reparent yourself. And so I've been doing a lot of those practices around just like being a parent to myself, and being like my own ancestor. And so I have a lot of conversations with myself, and like when I do something, when I fuck up, I'm just like, hey, Salimatu, it's okay. Like, I still love you. So like, it can be like a cheesy practice, but I really encourage everyone to just spend like a day just being your own parent, and like see all of the moments in which you like might think to abandon yourself, when someone asks if they can get, you can do like a rush deadline, and you're thinking about like, not sleeping or like not taking care of yourself or skipping breakfast or something, so you can do something for someone else or on someone else's timeline. And just like remembering kind of like just being a kid and just being like, no, you gotta go to bed. No, you gotta have breakfast. Did you drink water today? Like, how are you doing? And yeah, and just like to try and like take a day or maybe just an hour of your day and just like really show up for yourself in a way where you feel responsible for yourself, and you feel that you want to be your own parent, and be kind to yourself and be gentle and forgiving. And so that's what I would like to leave you with.